All right, chapter 6. Record. Screen. Okay. So chapter 6 deals with the skeleton, so cartilage and bone, okay, and how we make bone and stuff like that. And so skeletal system is the organ system with tissues that grow and change throughout life. And not only includes bones and cartilage, it also includes ligaments and other supportive tissues, okay, that wrap around bone and protect them. Okay, so cartilage is semi-rigid connective tissue. It is weaker than bone. So, cartilage, the best example of looking at this is, go to your local butcher or, go even KFC, buy chicken, take apart the meat, and then you can look at it cartilage and bone. The cartilage is slightly squishy. It's more flexible and resilient than bone. Okay. It is the purpose of cartilage is to prevent bone on bone, and so you rub in cartilage will give way a little bit because it's water, like there's water in there, and that water will squish out a little bit, and that makes it more resilient. Okay, mature cartilage is avascular, which is a big problem. With avascular means there's no blood vessels. If there's no blood vessels, that means it's harder to repair. Okay, there's no nutrients going there. Okay, chondrocytes and chondroblasts. Blasts are immature cells that make whatever's in front of it. So chondroblasts make cartilage. Chondrocytes are mature cells. Okay, so cartilage site cell. Okay, and they live inside the lacunae. And you'll see the same terminology for osteoblasts, which make bone, and osteocytes, which live inside bone. Okay, there are 3 types of cartilage: hyaline cartilage, okay, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. Okay, all right. The functions of cartilage. This one you can read by yourself. Okay. There's 2 types of growth: interstitial growth from within cartilage, and apositional growth, cartilage growing along the outside. Okay, interstitial growth. Okay, so this picture explains those 2 terms. Okay, so interstitial growth is from within cartilage. So you have 1 cell dividing into 2, and when it eventually divides into 2, it pushes the cartilage apart. So the newest cells are actually on the inside. Apositional growth is growing from the perichondrium. So the newest cartilage is coming from the surface. So the newest cartilage is on the outside. Okay, so those are the 2 growth of cartilage. Okay, bone. Okay, the bones of the skeleton are complex organs containing all 4 tissue types. Okay, the functions of bone are listed here, so make sure you go over this. Okay, there are 4 classifications of bone: long bones, which are longer than they are wide. So if you think the average bone that you draw, that is a long bone, or the average bone in a cartoon, that's a long bone. Short bones are known to be equal in length and width. These are the bones in your wrists or your ankles. They're small, kind of circular bones. They're equally long, and they are wide. Flat bones have thin surfaces. They're going to make up your skull, okay, your scapula, and your ribs. Okay, irregular bones are going to be complex shapes. Irregular bones are the ones that don't fit any other category. Okay, so you can see the classification of bones here. Okay, The general structure of a long bone has three parts. Okay, the diaphysis, the epiphysis, and the metaphysis. Okay, diaphysis is the middle of the bone. It's commonly known as the shaft. Okay, the middle of the bone. The two ends are the epiphysis. Okay, uh, they're the knobby enlarged regions on the edge, and they're where one bone attaches to another, and there will be special landmarks on each epiphysis to actually attach it to the next bone. Okay, and then in the middle is the metaphysis. That is a really small little area. In some textbooks, they actually consider part of the epiphysis. Okay. All right, long bones usually have a piece of articular cartilage. Okay, the piece of articular cartilage connects one bone to the next bone. Okay, and so the two pieces of cartilage on either side will if you bang the bone together, they'll bang cartilage on cartilage instead of bone on bone. Okay, that reduces the friction between the two and absorbs the shock when the bones move. Okay, bones also have a medullary cavity. It's the big hollow part of the bone inside. So bones, you're trying to do two things at once. You're trying to be really, really strong and protective, but you're also trying to be light. And the best way to do that is to have a very dense outside and a very empty inside. Okay. In adults, it contains yellow bone marrow. Okay. So you can see that here. So you can see the bone, they cut this in half here, and you can see inside is basically hollow with a medullary cavity that have blood vessels and stuff running through it. Okay. Okay. Epiphysis, so proximal epiphysis, distal epiphysis, okay. Proximal metaphysis, distal metaphysis, and in the middle is the diaphysis. Okay. The general structure of a bone has a periosteum, perimeter osteum bone. Periosteum surrounds the bone. So you can see the periosteum here. Inside the inner layer of this thing called compact bone is another layer of tissue. And that layer is bumpier, but it surrounds the entire tissue, and it's called the endosteum or dostium. Okay, endo for inside, osteum for bone, so dostium. Okay. Okay. Um, it contains osteoprogenitor cells, which we'll get into, the types of cells, osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Okay. So here you have all these cells on both sides. Okay. That are for building bones. So you build bones from the outside or you build from the inside as well. Okay. So here is the periosteum. Here is the endosteum. Okay. All right. The cells inside bone. Okay. Osteoprogenitor cells or osteogenic cells in other textbooks are going to be stem cells. Okay. And they'll produce osteoblasts. Osteoblasts will secrete bone matrix. So osteoblasts make stuff. They make something called osteoid. Osteoid is kind of gooey, but it hardens over time. And once it hardens, it traps itself inside the osteoid, and it becomes a osteocyte. Okay, osteocyte maintain the bone. Okay. The last but not least is osteoclasts. Okay, osteoclasts are large multinuclear cells that actually break down bone, and they break down bone and they release calcium. So your body needs calcium; it will release these osteoclasts and get them to chew up a little bit of bone and release calcium. Okay. Okay. So. Okay. Okay. The composition of bone matrix. So there are two components: the organic components, the softer stuff. So collagen fibers, ground substance cells. Okay, this stuff is going to make bone flexible. The organic components are going to make, or the inorganic components are going to make bone stiff. Okay, so if you don't have the organic components of bone, the I'm gonna reverse this a little bit first. If you don't have enough inorganic components of bone, if you don't have enough calcium, the bone becomes too soft and bendable, and that's where you get rickets. And that's where the like you've seen pictures of the poor kids where their thigh bone bends out because they don't have enough calcium. Okay, that's rickets, and that's missing the inorganic calcium components of bone. If you're missing the organic components of bone, it's even worse, actually. You get something called osteogenesis imperfecta, and that kills you by age 2, and your bones become too stiff and they break. Okay. Okay. All right. There's two types of bone: the compact bone and the spongy bone. So compact bone is going to be outside. Spongy bone is going to be inside. It literally looks like sponges. Okay. If you take apart a chicken, you'll see the inside of it. It looks like sponge. Okay. And that's heavy and compact and dense on the outside for strength, hollow on the inside with spongy bone running through for lightness. Okay. Okay. The basic unit of compact bone is the osteon. It's also known as the Haversian system. Okay. So let's talk about the parts of the osteon. The osteon is one of those things that look like tree rings. Okay. The thing that runs in the middle of the osteon. Okay. There's a hole in the center of the osteon that's called the central canal or the Haversian canal. Okay. Around it are something called concentric lamellae. They run in concentric circles around the central canal. So concentric lamellae. Okay. Embedded in these are little osteocytes that live inside the lacuna, and between two lacuna are going to be little channels that allow cell A to talk to cell B. Those little channels are called canaliculi. Okay. All right. Now, the central canals. Okay. The central canals always run parallel to the length of the long bone, but they have to communicate with each other. So there's going to be another set of canals that connect central canals to each other, and those are called perforating canals or Volkmann canals. Okay. Circumferential lamellae are these rings of bone. They're like lamellae, but the lamellae run around the osteon. Concentric circumferential lamellae run around the entire bone. They run around the circumference of the bone, so circumferential lamellae. Okay. Okay. Spongy bone is not really that interesting. Okay. Ossification. Hold on 1 second. Okay, there are two patterns of bone formation, two ways we form bones. Okay, intramembranous ossification and endochondral ossification. Okay, so intramembranous, inside membranes, okay? You grow an ossification center. Ossification center is exactly what it sounds like. Bone will start forming from the ossification center. These cells migrate through the mesenchyme into the center area. Okay, remember the mesenchyme, there's not a lot of cells. So these things can just crawl through them and kind of wedge themselves into the ossification center. And then start growing and growing and growing until you reach bones. Okay, and those are usually the bones of the skull and the shoulder blades. Not the shoulder blades, the collarbone. Okay. Endochondral ossification are all other bones. Okay, this is probably the more important one to understand. Your first skeleton, your fetal skeleton, is actually hyaline cartilage. Okay, so here's hyaline cartilage. Okay, the first thing that happens is these cells again invade into the center part of the cartilage. Okay, in the diaphysis here, and they form something called the primary ossification center. Okay, they also form a collar around the bone, around the cartilage actually. They go from killing the perichondrium to forming a periosteum. Okay, and then what they do is they bring in blood. When you bring in blood, it brings in nutrients and you can start growing much faster. Okay, so the primary ossification center starts going through this process called angiogenesis. It grows its own blood vessels. So it grows in and you can start growing thicker and thicker bone because now you have blood, and then you actually have a secondary ossification center, okay? And you start growing more bone here. This picture right here, number 5, that's what your bones look like when you're born. This picture, number 6, is when you're an adult. So the most important difference between 5 and 6 is this ridge right there called the epiphyseal plate, okay? This plate is the site of interstitial growth. So let me explain how this works. Okay, so here you see an x-ray. As soon as you look at an x-ray, you know this is a child, because you can see there is a region right there between, like in between the bone. This is all one bone, except there's a region right there that is a plate of cartilage, and you see that right there, and you see that. You can see that in all these other joints too. There's to point them out. The thumb here is fairly obvious as well. Okay. So what's happening? So bone reflects the X-ray, so you can see it. Cartilage does not, so it goes through. So now you can see the cartilage. The cartilage has a resting zone right here, a proliferating zone right here, hypertrophic zone right here, a calcified zone right here, and ossification zone. So one end, you're growing new cartilage. Okay, the cartilage grows. It grows so fast they form little discs of cell growth. It looks like a stack of coins. But as fast as this side grows, this side, the cartilage is dying. And it's dying, it's enlarging and then dying, enlarging and then dying. By enlarging and dying, it forms empty spaces that bone can grow into. And so you have bone growth on this side, you have cartilage growth on this side. And in the middle, between my hands, is the cartilage growing. And as you grow, that goes up, that goes up, that goes up, that goes up, and it goes up together. And that's how your long bones get longer. Okay, as it gets longer, you grow taller. Okay, so what happens? Okay, at the very end, I talk about it. here. They talk about it in probably somewhere else. But at the very end, when you stop growing, what happens is, look, this side grows but grows slower. This side grows but grows faster. And eventually the two sides meet up and seal. And by that time, you have no more cartilage. You have bone and bone. And so these two sides seal and you form the epiphyseal line. And that line is a line right there, and it is a remnant of the epiphyseal plate. Okay, so adults have a epiphyseal line, children have a epiphyseal plate that's made out of cartilage. Okay, if that so in females, that line formed by the time you're about 17. So no female in here probably grow that taller anyway by the time you're 17. Okay. Males, this occurs later. Okay. And you grow until you're about 21, 22. Okay. Okay. So now, as you grow taller, you have another problem. The bone is too thin. Okay. And so you have to grow thicker bone. And to grow thicker bone is appositional growth. Okay, so what happens is you form new bone around the outside. But that makes thicker bone, but that also makes heavier bone. So the other way you compensate is you chew out the bone on the inside. So the hole becomes bigger. So for a larger bone, you have a bigger, hollower center. So you save weight that way. Okay, so you're not gaining as much weight. You're hollowing out the center for stronger, bigger bone. Okay. 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 So here, the slide you can probably skip. Okay, nutrient artery. Bone growth, bone maintenance depends on growth hormones, vitamins, exercise. Okay. So these hormones regulate calcium levels, growth hormone. As a child, growth hormone stimulates cartilage growth at the epiphyseal plate. Okay, thyroid hormone stimulates the metabolic growth of osteoblasts, so more growth. Okay, calcitonin and parathyroid have opposite effects, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about hormones. Okay, this is why you need vitamins A, C, and D. Okay. All right. The effects of exercise. Okay. We constantly need mechanical stress on our bones. Mechanical stress increases bone density by increased osteoblast activity. Okay. Bones of athletes become thicker and stronger as a result of competitive and stressful exercise. And this is actually really kind of cool. You can see the difference in bones between the two arms. Okay. Especially for athletes. Okay. Okay. So for people like tennis players, like Serena Williams, her bones in her right arm will undoubtedly be thicker than the bones in her left arm because you hold the racket in the right arm and stuff all the time, and you can see this in other people too. The most obvious being knights and stuff. Medieval knights, they train all day with their swords in their right hand or mace or whatever, and that hand becomes a lot thicker and stronger than the other. And also blacksmith, medieval blacksmith, because they're hammering all day with their right hand, the bones on their right side become bigger than their left. Okay, bone lose mass with age, but this can be slow to reverse with weight-bearing exercise, and this is an important thing. This is why even the elderly population should be doing weight-bearing exercises. Okay, the types of fracture you can just read on your own. Okay, fracture repair, you can also just read on your own. It's just these 4 steps. Okay. Basically, you form a hematoma. That hematoma scars over into a soft callus, and you grow new bone. But your bone is constantly remodeling. Okay. Every time you put stresses on a bone, it builds up more bone. You don't put stresses on bone, it takes off bone. So you're constantly remodeling. So eventually, your old bone will look, your new bone will look just like your old bone. Okay, because you're constantly putting these same stresses on them. Okay, bone markings and stuff. We'll go over more bone markings when I talk about the individual bones, but just go over them for now by yourself and like know what these things are. Okay. Okay. During aging, bone changes in 2 ways. Loses the ability to produce organic matrix, which makes the bone stiffer and more easy to break. Loses calcium and other minerals. You suffer from osteopenia, which is insufficient ossification. It results in bone mass decrease, and that can lead to osteoporosis. Osteoporosis can lead to increasing fractures. Okay, this is normal bone. This is osteoporotic bone, so you can see how many more holes you will have here. Okay, and this is more. This is enlarged. This is like actually it's looking at one of these big holes, and you can see like more of these little holes inside as the osteoclasts are chewing it out, and this is more easily broken. Osteoporosis occurs more often in women because women have less bone to begin with, and honestly, something else that happens after um, menopause is they lose estrogen, and estrogen is needed for bone formation, so they have less bone formation, and that leads to osteoporosis. Okay. All right. Stop this right here. That's the end of the chapter.